The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was an architectural marvel, an immense chamber suspended within the heart of a Dyson sphere, where thousands of species gathered to negotiate the fate of the stars. Ornate pillars of living crystal pulsed with light, each beat a whisper of ancient agreements, broken truces, and warnings left unheeded. At the center of the chamber, High Chancellor Velcor of the Zeldar Dominion stood with the unmistakable air of one who did not believe in caution. His exoskeletal frame, gleaming obsidian under the chamber's artificial glow, shifted as he surveyed the council delegates with thinly veiled disdain. Around him, the representatives of the many galactic factions observed in measured silence, waiting for the inevitable moment when arrogance would meet wisdom. The speaker for the council, an aged and luminous being from the Seraphon race, inclined its head. Its form shimmered as it spoke, its voice layered with 1,000 harmonic frequencies that resonated across the chamber. High Chancellor Velcor, you stand here today in defiance of our collective wisdom. You intend to drag humanity into war. Despite the warning of this council, Velcor let out a low, clicking chitter, his species equivalent of a dismissive laugh. You expect me to fear humans? A species that only recently achieved interstellar flight? They are scattered, leaderless, incapable of true war. The Dominion does not waste its concerns on lesser creatures. A murmur rippled through the chamber, but the Seraphon remained undisturbed. Your words betray your ignorance, the counselor said, for you see them as they were, not as they are. Velcor's mandibles twitched. He was not a creature given to patience, and this spectacle was grating. They are weak, he said. We will take what we desire. Earth is rich in resources, its position strategic. They will either submit or be eradicated. A deep sigh emanated from the Seraphon, though whether it was sorrow or inevitability was unclear. You do not understand what you provoke, it said. There is a reason humanity has remained neutral, not because they are incapable of war, but because they choose not to engage in it on a galactic scale. That choice has protected you more than it has protected them. Velcor's ridged brow furrowed. He was used to hearing warnings from weaker species, pleas for peace disguised as cautionary tales. Yet something in the counselor's tone unsettled him. A new voice joined the conversation, belonging to a hunched, insectoid being with translucent wings folded tightly against its back. Grand Strategist Vri of the Kryn Collective, a species known for its mathematical precision in war, spoke for the first time. We have studied humanity, Vri rasped. We have learned from them. We have seen them fight among themselves before they ever turned their gaze to the stars. They are unlike any species we have encountered. Their wars do not simply end. They evolve. They do not conquer for the sake of conquest, yet they have toppled empires far greater than their own. You look at them now and see peace, but that peace is a choice, a mask they wear because it serves them. If you force them to remove it, you will not like what you see beneath. Velcor scoffed, but there was a slight hesitation before he spoke. You speak as if they are gods among mortals. They are nothing but primates with delusions of grandeur. The Seraphon tilted its luminous head. Then you have already lost, for underestimation is the first step toward ruin. The chamber darkened as a projection ignited above the council floor. It was a recording, grainy, distorted, but unmistakable. A battlefield, centuries old by human reckoning. Metal husks lay scattered like broken toys. The insignia of fallen Earth nations littered the ground, but the soldiers, those still standing, moved with eerie precision. Bodies caked in blood and smoke, eyes locked forward with an intensity that transcended species. The image shifted to a later war, a different world, yet the same relentless drive persisted. War was not simply something humanity engaged in. It was something they mastered. Where other species sought victory through overwhelming force or superior strategy, humans adapted in ways that defied logic. They fought as if defeat was an alien concept. The projection faded and silence reigned. Velcor shifted uncomfortably. He did not believe in ghosts, yet something about that footage felt wrong. Not because of what it showed, but because it suggested something even more terrifying. These were the wars humans fought among themselves. A species that could treat total annihilation as a footnote in their own history had no business being provoked. "Withdraw your fleets," the Seraphon urged, its voice softer now, almost pleading. "Let humanity remain neutral. If you do, you may yet survive." Velkor's pride flared. He would not be cowed by old legends and hushed warnings. "You waste your breath," he said, voice sharp with finality. "The Dominion will proceed as planned. We do not fear ghosts." The Seraphon dimmed, its luminescence fading as if in mourning. "No," it said. "But you will?" The chamber's great doors parted and Velkor swept out, his guards in formation behind him. He did not look back, nor did he see the solemn exchange of glances between the other council members. Grand Strategist Vree watched him go and clicked his mandibles in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "It is done, then," he murmured. The Seraphon inclined its head, its final words barely more than a whisper. They should have let humans stay neutral. The Zeldar fleet arrived in the Sol system, like a black tide blotting out the stars. Thousands of warships, each a monument to Dominion engineering, loomed over the outer planets, their hulls bristling with weapons that had broken 100 worlds. The path to Earth was open, unguarded by any significant fleet. No last-minute defenses, no desperate negotiations, just the quiet turning of planets in the void. High Chancellor Velkor stood at the bridge of the Dread Harbinger, his mandibles twitching in amusement. The human homeworld had not even sent a formal response to their declaration of war. No surrender, no resistance. The silence was almost insulting. "Proceed with the occupation," he ordered. "Break their defenses. The planet will fall within the day." The Dominion fleet surged forward, breaking past the orbit of Mars with effortless speed. The ship's energy signatures flared as they activated precision targeting systems, locking onto key infrastructure, power grids, communication hubs, military installations. Standard procedure. This was not a war. It was an execution. The first wave of orbital bombardments commenced, raining destruction upon strategic sites. Explosions dotted the surface like the embers of a dying fire. Cities flickered into darkness. Satellites crumbled. The Dominion officers murmured in satisfaction, confident that humanity's capacity to fight had already been cut by half. Then, something changed. Velkor watched the tactical readout shift, his amusement faltering. What should have been panicked distress signals were fragmented, misleading. Human systems weren't shutting down in chaos. They were reorganizing, adapting. "Chancellor," one of his officers said, mandibles clicking in confusion, "we're detecting anomalies in their data networks. Some of our targeting coordinates are incorrect." Velkor turned sharply. "Incorrect? We've verified the planetary scans ourselves." "Yes, Chancellor, but the data, it's shifting. Our targeting relays are." A ripple of static burst across the bridge as Dominion screens flickered. Then, for the first time in recorded Zeldar history, the fleet lost control of its own targeting systems. From Earth's surface, 1,000 signals pulsed back at the invaders, each carrying false information, ghost signatures, and misleading coordinates. Zeldar warships fired on empty fields, on ruins that had never housed critical infrastructure, on power plants that had already been shut down. Their attacks hit nothing of value. Velkor's mandibles ground together. How? The answer came a moment later. A pulse of electromagnetic energy surged from the planet, detonating in the midst of the Dominion fleet. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of disruption. The Zeldar had always relied on their superior technology, their ability to see the battlefield with perfect clarity. But humans had seen this before. They had studied wars fought in the dark, where information was as vital as bullets. And in the face of overwhelming force, they had learned to make themselves invisible. The moment of confusion was all it took. From the silent void behind the moon, human warships emerged, ugly, utilitarian vessels compared to the sleek might of the Dominion fleet, but they did not come alone. They carried with them a storm of drones, automated combat platforms designed not for direct engagement, but for interference. These machines swarmed through the Dominion ranks, disrupting communication lines, scrambling sensor feeds, and forcing ships into disarray. The first Zeldar battleship exploded as a missile, fired from what should have been a disabled Earth defense system, found its mark. The second followed as human fighter squadrons, their movements erratic and unpredictable, weaved through the gaps in the Dominion formation. They did not fight with brute strength, but with precision. Velcor roared. This is not possible, but it was. On the surface, what had seemed like a disorganized civilian population had seamlessly transitioned into a war-ready force. Military assets, once hidden beneath the illusion of vulnerability, mobilized with terrifying efficiency. Hidden bunkers opened. Weapons that should not have existed in a primitive civilization fired into the sky, striking with calculated aggression. Most species, when faced with an invasion of the scale, panicked. They begged for mercy. They sought diplomacy. Humans adapted. In the city of Chicago, a squadron of Zeldar shock troopers found themselves moving through empty streets, their targeting scanners struggling to locate any heat signatures. Their orders were simple. Secure the city center. Eliminate resistance. They never saw the ambush coming. From underground tunnels, from darkened buildings, from alleyways marked as unimportant by Dominion scans, humans emerged, not in a desperate last stand, but in methodical, surgical strikes. They did not wear uniforms. They were civilians, soldiers, engineers, hackers, assassins, indistinguishable from the millions who had once filled the streets. But they fought with ruthless precision, striking at weak points in Zeldar armor, exploiting vulnerabilities no scouting report had ever mentioned. It was not war. It was a dissection. Across the planet, the same scenario played out. Zeldar landing parties were systematically lured into kill zones, their superior weapons made irrelevant by an enemy that understood terrain better than they did. The invasion was turning into a war of attrition, but not the kind the Dominion had prepared for. Velcor's claws dug into the metal railing of his command deck. Deploy the full fleet. Overwhelm them. Burn their cities. Make them break. His officers hesitated. Chancellor, if we commit everything, we may expose ourselves to. Velcor struck the officer hard enough to send him sprawling. Do it. Now. And so, the Zeldar fleet pushed harder, unleashing the full fury of their war machine. But something was different now. This was no longer an invasion. This was a trap. Earth was not a world caught unprepared. It was a world waiting. Every civilian who seemed too calm, every system that had gone offline too easily, every missed target had been calculated. Humanity had studied war for centuries. Not just the art of fighting, but the art of making their enemies believe they had already won. Velcor, for the first time in his reign, felt a cold sensation unfamiliar to his kind. It was not anger. It was not frustration. It was fear. The Zeldar had expected to conquer a helpless world. Instead, they had stepped into a battlefield where they were the ones being hunted. And the hunt had only just begun. Velcor paced within the command chamber of the Dread Harbinger, his claws clicking against the metal floor in a rhythm of barely restrained fury. The invasion should have been over in hours, yet days had passed, and humanity refused to break. What should have been a swift conquest had devolved into a nightmare of attrition, and for the first time in Dominion history, a lesser species was turning the tide against them. The war was no longer confined to Earth's surface. The Dominion fleet, once an unchallenged armada, had been whittled down by ambushes, sabotage, and tactics that defied conventional strategy. Human warships, crewed by galactic standards, moved in unpredictable patterns, striking vulnerable supply lines before vanishing into asteroid fields and debris clouds. Captured Dominion vessels had been turned against their former masters, their systems overridden by human cyber warfare. In desperation, Velcor ordered the deployment of bioweapons. The Dominion had crushed countless worlds with tailored plagues, engineered to break resistance without costly prolonged engagements. The pathogens were designed to target specific genetic markers, spreading like wildfire through native populations while leaving Zeldar forces untouched. It was a tried and tested method. It failed. Within hours of deployment, human scientists cracked the genetic sequencing and formulated countermeasures. What should have been a slow, agonizing death for billions became an inconvenience at worst. Earth's global infrastructure, designed to handle pandemics long before humans had reached the stars, adapted with terrifying speed. Vaccines were distributed through repurposed industrial networks, and resistance fighters used a failed bioweapon attack to rally more recruits to their cause. Velcor watched the data stream across his displays in disbelief. No species should have been able to react this fast. The Council's warning echoed in his mind, a phantom whisper he had dismissed too easily. He turned to his warlords, his voice sharp with barely contained rage. Deploy the orbital siege protocols. If we cannot take their world intact, we will break it. From high above, Dominion warships shifted into position, directing their weapons downward. Precision strikes had failed. Now, brute force would dictate the battle. The bombardments began anew, not with strategic targeting, but with indiscriminate destruction. Cities burned, oceans boiled, entire regions were reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. Yet humanity did not yield. Instead of fear, the relentless destruction fueled something far worse: determination. Civilian populations had long since moved into underground networks, bunkers designed not just for survival, but for retaliation. Resistance cells coordinated their movements with surgical precision, disrupting Dominion supply chains and dismantling forward bases before vanishing like ghosts. In occupied zones, Dominion troops faced an enemy that did not fight by the rules of conventional warfare. There were no battle lines, no clear fronts. Humans did not engage in honorable duels or predictable skirmishes. They struck from the shadows, planting explosives in supply depots, infiltrating command centers, and turning Dominion technology against itself. They had studied guerrilla warfare for centuries, and now the full weight of that knowledge was unleashed against an enemy that had never needed to adapt. Reports flooded into Velcor's command network, each one more dire than the last. Entire battalions had gone dark. Fleet resupplies had been intercepted. Human forces had somehow managed to hijack a Dominion dreadnought, using it to carve a path of destruction through the orbital blockade before self-destructing in the heart of the Dominion fleet. And then came the true horror: a single human transmission broadcast across all Dominion channels. A woman appeared on the screen, clad in the patchwork armor of a resistance leader. Her face bore the marks of war, scars, dirt, determination. Behind her, a burning Dominion outpost smoldered against the night sky. Her voice was steady, each word precise. You came to conquer us. You thought we would submit. You believed your war would be won before it even began. That was your first mistake. Velcor felt his claws tighten into fists as he watched. You assumed humanity was weak, she continued, that we would scatter, that we would beg. That was your second mistake. The image flickered, shifting to grainy footage of Dominion troops being ambushed in the ruins of a once great city. Their weapons malfunctioned. Their armor had been breached. The camera lingered on a Dominion warlord, once a towering figure of power, now lying in the dirt, lifeless. And now, she said, you have made your greatest mistake. The feed cut out, replaced by a single symbol, an ancient Terran insignia, one that had been carried into battle long before humans had even dreamed of the stars. A skull wreathed in flames. The message was clear. This was no longer a war of occupation. This was a war of extinction. Velcor's breath came in ragged snarls, his mind racing. He had underestimated them. The Council had tried to warn him. The Kryn strategist had spoken of this exact scenario. But it was too late. The Dominion was no longer fighting to conquer Earth. It was fighting to survive. Velcor stood motionless in the shattered remains of his command chamber. The once pristine halls of the Dread Harbinger were dark, illuminated only by the flickering glow of emergency lights. The Dominion fleet had been broken, its ships either destroyed or forced into retreat. The great war machine that had crushed countless civilizations now lay in ruin, undone by an enemy that should never have posed a threat. The fall had begun slowly, almost imperceptibly. After the initial failures to subdue Earth, Dominion forces had attempted to regroup, to adapt, to force humanity into a battle of attrition. But it was humanity that had dictated the war's pace. The humans had never fought for survival alone. They had fought for vengeance. From the moment Dominion forces set foot on Earth, the battle had been lost. What the Zeldar had mistaken for disorder had been a strategy far beyond anything they had encountered. The humans had fed them false intelligence, manipulated their targeting systems, turned every perceived weakness into a calculated trap. Every loss the Dominion suffered only made the humans fight harder. Velcor clenched his claws as he replayed the last reports from the front lines. The Dominion's outer colonies had begun falling one by one, not to a massive counterattack, but to something worse, coordinated human insurgencies. They had taken the war beyond Earth, striking at supply lines, hijacking Dominion warships, infiltrating strongholds that should have been impenetrable. They fought without mercy, without hesitation, and without the restraint that had defined so many of the Dominion's previous adversaries. Humanity did not conquer planets. They turned them. Entire Dominion-controlled worlds had risen up against their masters, not because they sought freedom, but because humanity had shown them how to dismantle the empire that had ruled them for centuries. Then came the final blow. The Dominion homeworld Zelvok Prime had never known war. Its defenses were formidable, its fleets always stationed nearby. No enemy had ever come close to threatening its skies. Velcor had believed that, no matter what happened elsewhere, his empire would endure so long as its heart remained intact. But humans did not fight for mere survival. They fought to end their enemies. It had started with whispers, communications blackouts, reports of Dominion ships going silent. Then, without warning, the human fleet arrived. Not in formation, not in overwhelming numbers, but in a series of precise, calculated strikes. They bypassed entire defensive sectors, slipping past security networks that should have detected them, using Dominion ships against their own kind. By the time the Dominion realized what was happening, it was too late. Explosions rocked Zelvok Prime as orbital platforms fell one after another. The humans did not demand surrender. They did not open negotiations. They simply struck, with the cold efficiency of a species that had spent its entire existence perfecting the art of war. Velcor had watched from orbit as his world burned. His own people, the proud conquerors of 1,000 civilizations, fled their cities in terror, realizing too late that their arrogance had sealed their fate. A message had been broadcast across the Dominion, a single transmission overriding every network. The same woman who had spoken before now stood on the bridge of a captured Dominion dreadnought, her expression unreadable. "This is what happens to those who believe humanity is weak," she had said. "You could have left us alone. You could have let us remain neutral. You were warned." She leaned forward, her voice unwavering. "There will be no peace." And then the bombardments began. Velcor had ordered a retreat, but there was nowhere left to run. His fleet had been shattered, his army scattered. The Dominion, once the greatest force in the known galaxy, was collapsing, its own people surrendering to the inevitable. Now he stood alone. The doors to his command chamber hissed open, and he turned, knowing what he would see before he even looked. The woman from the broadcast stood there, clad in black combat armor, her weapon lowered at her side. Behind her, human soldiers fanned out, their expressions unreadable. Velcor straightened, refusing to cower. "What now, human? Will you erase us from history? Will you slaughter my people as we slaughtered yours?" The woman studied him for a long moment. Then, in a voice devoid of hatred or satisfaction, she spoke. "No," she said. "You'll do that yourselves." She turned and walked away, leaving him in silence. As the human forces withdrew, Velcor looked out over the remains of his empire. The Zeldar Dominion was finished, not because of human cruelty, but because humanity had given them something far worse than destruction. They had given them irrelevance. The war was over, and the Dominion would never rise again. The Galactic Council convened in silence, a chamber once filled with the quiet arrogance of old empires, now weighed down by uncertainty. Representatives of 100 species sat in uneasy stillness, their eyes drawn toward the central podium where the humans stood. There was no need for ceremony, no need for pretense. The war had ended, and with it, the order they had once known. Humanity had not asked to sit among them. They had not petitioned for power or sought recognition. They had simply arrived, their presence undeniable, their influence already reshaping the very foundations of the galaxy. The Zeldar Dominion, once the unchallenged rulers of the stars, had crumbled, not in fire and blood, but in the slow, inevitable realization that they no longer mattered. Admiral Sarah Kovacs stood at the center of the chamber, her uniform devoid of unnecessary insignia, her expression unreadable. She was not here to gloat. Humanity did not need to declare victory. It had already been written in the stars. "The war is over," she said, her voice carrying across the vast hall. "But let me be clear, this was never a war we wanted." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some listened with quiet resignation. Others, the few remnants of the Dominion's former allies, watched with barely concealed resentment. "We were warned," Kovacs continued, "warned that the Zeldar would not stop, warned that war was inevitable. And yet, when the time came, the galaxy stood by and watched. Some of you believed we would be crushed in days. Others thought we would surrender before the first battle was fought." She let the silence linger before continuing. "You were wrong." No one argued. No one dared. "The Dominion is gone," she said, "and in its place, something new must rise. But it will not be another empire. It will not be another cycle of war and conquest. We are not here to rule you." A representative of the Kryn leaned forward, his dark eyes calculating. "Then what do you want, human?" Kovacs met his gaze without hesitation. "We want what we always wanted. The right to stand on our own. The right to choose our own path. The right to exist without threat, without interference." A murmur of agreement spread through the chamber. Many had suffered under the Dominion's rule, forced into submission for the sake of Galactic Order. They had seen what humanity was capable of, not just war, but resistance, adaptation, survival against impossible odds. But the fear remained. "You shattered the Dominion." Another voice spoke, this one belonging to a representative of the Thalaran, a species known for its pragmatism. "You did what no one else could. And now, you hold the power to shape the galaxy as you see fit. What happens when another threat rises? When another empire seeks to impose its will? Will you fight again? Will you replace the Dominion with a human-led order?" Kovacs shook her head. "We have no desire for an empire. What we build next will not be dictated by conquest, but by something stronger, understanding." She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the gathered species. "From this day forward, Earth will not stand alone, but we will not rule. We will not dictate. We will not force our will upon those who wish only to live in peace. The age of domination is over. The age of survival is over. It is time for something new." The chamber remained silent. No cheers. No declarations of loyalty. Only quiet acceptance. As the meeting adjourned, Kovacs turned to leave, her mission complete. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had changed it. And for the first time in history, the stars belonged to everyone.